Hey everyone, it's Mike Henry with Meet Follower of One. Today, our guest, who is still joining, there she is, Miss Heather
Hello?
Trumpfheller. Am I saying your last name right?
Yes, Trumpfheller.
So Heather and I met earlier today, and instead of me doing my usual mystery guest, I just invited her to be on this live stream. Thanks for joining us, Heather.
I love it. We just move with the spirit, right? And I agree. We kept wanting to talk more and more, and we're like, let's just turn this into a live stream. So I love the flexibility.
Well, I'm excited. So I, Chris, if you can, I see Chris Castro's on here. Let us know if you can hear us okay. Um, Heather, tell us a little bit about yourself. Just tell us where you're from and what you do and that kind of thing.
I would love to. Yes, I'm born and raised in Dallas, Texas. So I grew up in a suburb over there, and I really always was a believer, which was an amazing household to grow up into, amazing community to grow up into. I had opportunities to really step up in my faith pretty early on. I led Fellowship of Christian Athletes at my high school. I was involved in my church newspaper. And then I went the journalism route, which took me to University of Missouri, where I studied broadcast journalism. And then I worked for NBC for about 4 years as a reporter and an anchor. And really, that was a trying time because I learned I don't compartmentalize very well. And someone's worst day is your best story, essentially. And I really
Mm-hmm.
just struggled with news is hard and there's a lot of darkness in our world. And so I've been
Yes.
praying about it, and God shifted me out of broadcast news into public relations. And I joined a firm back in Dallas that was actually supporting faith-based ministries. So I actually joined the Billy Graham team to do social media. I did the I in
Cool.
Second videos, and I worked with a lot of pastors on interview prep, and I was able to use my journalism skills there. And then I shifted again from broadcast to PR to then technology. In 2013, I joined a tech consulting company where I was for the past 11 years working in that. And they moved me from Dallas to Austin. I moved to Austin to run our government contracts work. And really during then, I always started feeling this nudge, like, if I'm a believer, am I supposed to be doing more? Like, how am I making an impact? Or am I off the hook to advance the gospel because God called me to the marketplace? And I remember I was at this leadership conference, and I was telling a colleague that I had known for 6, 7 years about being a Christian. And he was like, I have known you and never knew you were a believer. And that just gutted me. But that spurred me to really start a Christian employer resource group at my organization, which then became this whole new. Once I started inviting God into the workplace, I integrated him into every area of my life. And then last year, he just totally had me flip my hands upward in pure sacrifice there. And just, I submitted all of that to him. I quit my job after 11 years. I went on this whole journey of being still and actually allowing him to guide me versus me create my own milestones and measure of success. And that brought me then to Switchboard, which is where I'm at now. And we're a nonprofit platform that connects missionaries with believers so that everyone can really invite God into their everyday life and advance the gospel together. So that is me. And I live in Austin now. I have a Schnauzer dog. I worship at Red Rocks Church here in Austin, if there's any Austin nights here. And then I'm very involved in the community building aspects here. Austin is a very connected city. So I'm still involved in the tech world, a lot of the faith-based marketplace world here too. So
Very cool. So you kind of went through the description of Switchboard quickly. Tell people a little bit more about Switchboard.
yeah, and I'll drop a link here in the chat too.
Yeah.
We're a platform. We're essentially volunteers, like really everyone on here, right? All believers. We all have these unique skills. And we hear so much about that, right? And there's so many parables about this in the Bible. But sometimes we get in our own way. And really, I mean, Mike and I were talking about this earlier, that it took me a long time to realize that being a connector was a unique skill, that is not something that everyone has, that is a way that God is truly using me to advance the gospel. But I needed I needed someone to help me like put it in those words or show me how that could be utilized to actually be a part of the Great Commission. And that's what a switchboard essentially wants to do, is when our volunteers are really just all believers, make a profile, they fill out, tell me about your life experiences, right? Are you a parent? Have you made homeschool curriculum? What languages do you speak? Are you passionate about a specific region? Are you a former missionary? Have you been on a short-term mission trip before? Are you passionate about a certain cause, like Bible literacy or clean water? Or what is it that really drives you, right? God puts all these things on our heart. And it's amazing because for the longest time, like we have a creator God, right? This like big C creator who made us to be creative beings. And for a long time, I thought some of this like creativeness was frivolous, right? And it's like, oh, I should be serving in a better capacity. And it's like everything you can do, you either do with Jesus or you don't do with Jesus. So if you're building websites, you can either do that with Jesus or not do it with Jesus.
Yeah.
If you're auditing taxes, you either do it with Jesus or you don't. And it does not matter if your client is faith-based, but there's so many lean ministries and missionaries who God has called them to be present with the people in Kenya, for example, but they don't need to be bogged down with learning SEO to get their website up. But someone in Austin might be able to have that experience, be invited into that dream together. And then you have this polycentric mission team now.
Yeah. Very cool. And I think it's great because we're taking advantage of the technology. A lot of people complained about things like the internet and screens and stuff like that. And yet those things are subject to God too. His people can use them as well. And so to me, it's exciting because, Follower of One has always been an online community. That's why we started, because it was easier for me to find people online who were discontent with their faith than it was by, shaking hands with people at my church.
Absolutely.
And,
and now we actually have this new skills assessment that we're having people in church congregations are taking it and really seeing how their skills are relevant. And someone the other day actually said to me, they were like, it's amazing to see AI be used for the kingdom. And back to your point of technology, it's if you can be afraid of something or you can be unaware of how to use it. But at the end of the day, like God, he will use all of these things to bring glory to his name, right? I mean, I was telling that to someone even about the pandemic. Like God did not send COVID-19, but he used it. He used it to change and shape my life. He used so many of these things. So I agree. Technology is such a blessing that people are able to say, especially with the work from home movement of the pandemic, that so much can be done virtually. And that's what Switchboard is. So our volunteer platform is entirely virtually. So we know that there are so many people who are not physically called to go for different reasons, but they can still be used to advance that gospel because not everything has to be done in person.
Yeah.
And you just said it. We love a virtual community.
That's right. That's exactly right. A lot of cool things happen. Most of the people that I know that I interact with on a regular basis are people that I've met since I started Follower of One.
That's amazing.
Now, there are a few in here, including my own family members that I've known for longer, but it's just amazing how God is using us. I still connect with and interact with people that I knew before I started Follower of One, but many of them now, they're learning about, the whole idea of living our faith more. Some of them have actually engaged in Follower of One. In fact, a church I used to attend invites me back to speak on Labor Day, and then they do the Marketplace mission trip a couple weeks after that. They've done that 2 years in a row now. So it's kind of cool to see God using all that.
And I think it's amazing because Switchboard in so many ways is what I wish I would have had 5 years ago when I was feeling very like without vision, lacking purpose, working really hard, but not like I wasn't running my own race, right? I was like tied to this company. I was driving success for someone else, and I was really unsure how that fit in. And so Switchboard is essentially like what I wish I would have had when I was looking for that purpose. But I think you're right. Like this is exactly like there's so many employee resource groups that are encouraging their employees to like be involved in things like a Follower of One or serve. And it's not because it takes time from them, but it's giving them more purpose to their employees, that's actually retaining them. So I think you're right. These organizations, these churches, it's not competition. It's helping people find purpose and vision. So they're showing up better at where they work or where they serve or where they worship. And it's retaining them in that aspect because they're getting filled in other areas.
Exactly. In fact, I often say my major complaint was that if I couldn't work in Sunday school, or if I couldn't do something with the men's ministry or whatever, then pretty much spiritually, my goal was to just stay out of trouble until Sunday. Just a really rotten reason for Jesus to have to die.
Yes. No, and I have actually been reading John Mark Comer's book, Practicing the Way. And so much of it is, why do we do things to get into heaven? I'm trying to get heaven into you. Like, get the spirit of that inside you. And I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, for me, it was time. My college job, I was on a time clock. I would punch in and go to work. And when I became a Christian, I wanted all of my time to count for eternity, not just the parts of it when I could be at a church or doing something with a bunch of other believers. I see Yashiva has joined us. Yashiva is in Pakistan. So, hey, Yashiva, thanks for joining.
Chris, you're going through the Practicing the Way video series. Yes, it is so good.
Yeah, Chris is a great student. She's always studying or learning something. She just got a master's degree too. So she was in seminary the last couple of years, virtually getting a master's degree. And I don't remember exactly in what. You can put it in the chat, Chris, but very, very exciting just to see what's going on. So tell us a little bit more about your experience as you interact with the organizations in your role at Switchboard. I think one thing that you mentioned, I think we ought to point out, do you sense that God is kind of stirring the pot, that things are happening more and more now than they have in a long time? Or do you see like the growth in Faith at Work movement being kind of flat?
Okay, love that question, because this past year has been amazing that with Switchboard, I was able to go on a road show. So I went to the Perspectives conference. And if you're not familiar, Perspective is essentially a discipleship course in person over about 15 weeks. And you really figure out like ministry and your role within that. So I went to the Perspectives conference. I went to the Missio Nexus Missionaries and Church Ministry Pastor Conference. And then I got to go to Lausanne, which happens, every 12-ish years. This year was in South Korea. There was 5,000 believers from all over the world. And we were talking a lot about what it really looks like to advance the gospel right now. And there is actually an entire marketplace track at Lausanne, because that's what they're seeing, right? And I know there's this famous Billy Graham quote that the next revival is going to happen in the workplace. And that is exactly what we're seeing, right? And Rick Warren was up there talking about some of these statistics, and some of them are really shocking, right? Like only 1 in every 170,000 Christian or something goes on a missionary. And the numbers have dropped drastically. And the numbers of missionaries have actually decreased even more from the pandemic. Like, I think it's like only 2% of believers will go on a mission trip. And majority of those did when they were teenagers, right? And it's like, so yes, like we're seeing missions change. And I think with technology and adapting, and an analogy that I always love is thinking about like Uber, right? 10 years ago, getting in the car with a stranger when you landed at an airport would be terrifying. And now, like when I landed in South Korea, I was like, great, I don't have to worry about the language barrier because Uber's going to translate for me and they're going to get me to my hotel. So I think really like leaning into technology has been a huge thing. But Missio Nexus talked a lot about these polycentric missions teams and how working alongside different missionaries and people in other parts of the world, right? Like you just said, like Yushiva, you're in Pakistan. You have a completely different perspective than I would ever have. So hearing your perspective is going to make me a better believer, a better daughter, a better employee. And it's like, really, that's why a lot of people I feel like used to go on these mission trips, right? It was like teenagers who needed to like get a new perspective. But we still need to be having that. We need to have this global perspective and uniting the body of Christ for that. And that's what we talked a lot about Luzon, was this polycentric missions team with some people in the marketplace, some people in the church, some people in different parts of the world, some people with this business background, people with passion in this, and coming together. And then younger generations, like reconciliation between that as well, right? Is there's no right or wrong with how Gen Z wants to do it versus millennial, but Gen Z is motivated very differently than other generations. They grew up in this digital age, right? This is normal for them to be virtual, to maybe never go on a missions trip because they're wondering what would be the impact I have. They want to see that impact now. And my dog wants to join the conversation, so I don't know if you can hear him, but he's barking. So again, perks of working from home is we get furry coworkers, but
Exactly. So, well, it's very cool. I agree with you. I had several friends who were at Lausanne, including, I mentioned to you earlier, Joe Carroll from Biblical Leadership for Excellence. He was one of them that went, and there were a number of people that went. They were very excited about all of that. I still think much more granularly and 1% at a time, but I'm excited because I do see, I used to go where I would go months where I was the only person I talked to that even thought about something that had to do with faith in the workplace. And now, because of technology, I can talk to those people all the time.
And you're right, like community, the definition of community has shifted, and there is a lot of this online community. And I know when we were chatting earlier, I mentioned a couple of, organizations I love, like Faithly, which is essentially like a blog type series of different perspectives from people thinking about missions in the workplace. There's ERG ministries now. And this past weekend, I actually got to go to the Chinese missions convention, and someone was saying that how great and wonderful things are still happening, but they look differently, right? Like God's miracles just look a little bit different, and you have to just be open to looking for them in different ways. And I think that's the big part about it, right? Is there's so many barriers. We have actually more noise and distractions with the access to these communities, but you have to just be more intentional about it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's very exciting because Jesus doesn't fit in our little box. He's constantly stretching our perspective of what he's doing. And everything's operating on his schedule according to his plan. It's just too cool.
I do think about that a lot, that like New Year's, right? I'm sitting here, I'm making my 2025 new planner, making my goals, and I think about it all the time that like we have a new day every day. Like God does not necessarily care about New Year's. And so I actually was telling this to you earlier that, Mike asked me, how can I pray for you? And I said, I am trying to remind myself, like the story of the 10 lepers, right? God heals them all, but only one comes back and praises him. And I don't want that to be me. I don't want to take for granted that I'm now living a life that I prayed for. And I don't want to start my year with being like, okay, God, here's the things I would like for you to accomplish in 2025, when one, you're not bound by time. He doesn't necessarily care what year it is, right? And some of these blessings might not even be done in my lifetime, but actually end the year on this posture of gratitude and praise and thanksgiving for all that he's already done. And so to me, I think you're right, like looking at this whole vision casting and time just so differently when we have Jesus, and his time is so much different.
No, it's exactly correct. One of the things that's been the most surprising to me since beginning Fall War of One is how Jesus is answering prayers that I prayed 35 years ago. Early in my career, I wanted my work life to count. And I wanted God to use the things that I was experiencing. And so now he is. The time was necessary. Many things had to change in the technology world for that to happen. So many things had to happen that are way outside of my control, that I didn't have any influence over whatsoever. And yet God wove all that together to answer my prayer so that I can just rejoice in what he's done. It's very cool.
Absolutely.
So our group, and because of the holiday, I would expect we haven't had a whole lot of folks on here, but I'm very grateful for Chris and Yashva joining. Chris told us that her master's is in pastoral ministry. She and I have actually had some conversations about how ministry doesn't look like it used to, how pastors don't look like they used to. And, and part of that is she's our community manager as well. She's paying
Amazing.
attention to people in the community and trying to pray for them. We have a prayer team as well. So what do you see? What's a good challenge for people who might listen to this podcast about? One, I would love to challenge them to connect with you, which they'll be able to do in the online community, or if we publish this publicly, we'll put your LinkedIn profile on there as well. But what are some things that you can challenge individual believers to do? What should we be doing next based on what we know now?
That's a great question. I think for me, what I wish I would have been challenged on really is we are the ones that tend to get in our own way, right? And we were talking about this earlier, that you might not think your skills are relevant or worthwhile, or really, like, someone asked me this a couple years ago. Does your calendar and your bank account match your love of the Lord? Like, does your calendar reflect your passions? If you meet someone, you say your core values are faith, family, friends. Like, should it actually be like Netflix, family, friends, faith? And you know what I mean? Money. I think it's really that, like, as people, especially with like us recording this on December 31st, right? Like, we are the ones that get in our own way, but Jesus modeled boundaries and discipline better than anyone. And Chris, as you're probably going through practicing the way, like, I'm keeping reminding that, like, following Christ actually means saying no to a lot of things, but we're the ones that have our own barriers, right? Our inner critic and our demons inside of us are telling us, like, you're not good enough for that. Why would that be relevant? Why would that be worthy? You are worthy because you are the child of the King who gave you such unique things. And I think really just like relieving the stress from that. And I was talking to someone the other day that she really wanted to make like cute hats with like different like sayings on them or whatever. And she's like, it feels so frivolous. And I'm like, it's not frivolous if you're creating them with beauty, like, and rejoicing the Lord and like glorifying the Lord in that. Like, again, we have this big C creator God so that we can all be creative human beings. And so I really want to challenge people to like get out of your comfort zone in 2025, right? Whether that's serving in a new way. I know for me, I was able to learn so many of my transferable skills, right? As I went from broadcast to PR to tech to nonprofit to now running essentially the marketing and partnerships for a startup, because I learned a lot of those skills in serving. And I made those transferable skills by trying them out in different serving capacities, but getting out of your comfort zone, getting that perspective, but really like check yourself. Does your bank account and does your calendar reflect your love of the Lord? And if this is the year that you want to integrate God into every area of your life, like January 1st is a great way to start it, even though, again, God is not bound by our timelines, but we love New Year's Day. We love new beginnings. And I just really think that's a beautiful time to start that.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for you joining me on this conversation. Chris put it in the chat, a no leads to a better yes.
Yes. That's so good.
So I think it is. I think we're all, we get the chance, we get opportunities to encourage one another. I appreciate the power that community gives us and how our joy is contagious and how Jesus uses that joy to motivate us and to energize us and to keep us going. And that joy is exciting. It gets us involved, and we realize, we know when we're experiencing it, that there is no substitute. There are some replacements that we will accept, but there's no real substitute for the joy of the Lord. So it's cool to be in a place where we can re-enjoy that joy at any moment because we're intentional with our faith.
Yeah, and joy and peace, I feel like, are such buzzwords around Christmas. And so I had been diving into Luke as it was leading up to the new year and really have been thinking about that. And I actually wrote this down, that Peace is based on a steadfast trust in God and infuses us with the power of internal stability. Peace is not connected to a lack of noise, trouble, or difficulty. It means to be in the midst of these things and still be calm in your heart, because peace is a person. And I agree. Like, I feel the same way about joy. Like, I find joy, or I find peace in circumstances like, oh, I found a great parking spot. Now I have joy. And it's like, that is not joy. Like, properly identify that joy is a person, peace is a person in Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And something else, like, I was even thinking about how I love that we're getting to do this virtually, but the whole love my neighbor, that looks so differently now. People are loving people in other parts of the world and other parts of the country. But that was actually another thing that I challenged myself on the end of this year, was actually, do I know more what's going on in someone in Pakistan's life than I do my next door neighbor? And so that was actually one of my 2025 goals, is like, how can I bring more peace and joy to my actual physical neighbors, my neighborhood, and like that kind of community? Because you're right. Like, I've shifted more heavily on this digital community, but there's just also so much of that in the physical community there. And so I think that's what's been beautiful too about like integrating God into every area of my life. It's actually transformed into the way I'm showing up for my next door neighbors. So yeah, I was just thinking about that when I was ruminating on how cool that this community is virtual, but we get to bring those love out to the people we physically interact with too.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I'm grateful. I could talk to you all day, except that I have a terrible attention span. And
okay.
so
walks are 18 minutes for a reason. So this is also for everyone else's attention span. No,
but I'm grateful for you doing this. You're going to be on our next mission trip, right?
I will, January 19th. So if anyone's attending that, I will be on that call to kick it off, and I'll be attending that mission trip. So I'm excited to see what God does during that.
So we get to meet each other more and watch what God does. I'm excited to be involved in this with you. Thanks so much for joining me on the call today. This has been a blast.
Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. Chris and Yausheva, thank you very much for being on here as well. And I'm just grateful to be a child of God and grateful to be friends with you guys so that we can watch him do his thing. Thanks very much.